Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here and taking up time, your lunch time, for what I'm hoping is going to be a very enlightening session. My name's Edwin Bernard, and I'm the coordinator of the HIV Justice Network, and I've just spent the morning first at a press conference and then at the Get a Test Risk Arrest session talking about HIV criminalization, which is the criminalization of alleged non-disclosure or potential or perceived exposure or transmission, and laws and policies that do that. Talking about it around the world and providing a lot of data and analysis and talking about it sort of from a policy point of view. And that's the work that I've been doing for many years. But I have to say that this session is really going to make it real, because I have the honor of introducing three amazing people, all of whom have intimate personal experience of a criminal case. And we can say, we can have the Global Commission on HIV and the Law come down on HIV criminalization. We can have Elton John say a vaccine isn't going to end HIV criminalization, and that we can say that, policies and lawmakers and judges all need to get with it. But I think when you hear the personal stories and just how inappropriate the criminal law is, first of all as an HIV prevention tool, but also the kind of injustices that happen when people living with HIV appear in the criminal justice system, and the human rights violations, and the lack of support that people living with HIV on both sides of the case get. I think that will give us a much clearer idea of just how unjust HIV criminalization is. Without further ado, because I've spoken enough already today, I'm going to give the floor over first of all to Louis Guy from Norway, who's going to talk about his very personal experience.
Yep, thank you, Edwin. I'll try not to be so much of an activist and more of like a personal storyteller this time. My story started really back in the autumn of 2010. I was diagnosed with HIV earlier that year, and I met an old boyfriend of mine. We had sex, oral sex. We had an accident. He cut me on my penis and there was blood. Later on, he tested positive around November 2010, and nothing really happened. We were still friends, we talked about it, but he wanted us to get back together as boyfriends again. And I already had a new boyfriend, so I said no. And he made threats. If you don't get back to me, I will report you to the police. I said no, and he did in April 2011. So we went through the procedure of interviews with the police and all that stuff. When the investigation was closed around December 2011, things had changed a lot, because they have tested the virus of each of us, and that showed that we had different viruses, so I could not possibly have infected him. He must have been infected by somebody else. And at the same time, then his statement to the police, in light of this, showed that he had accused me of being the only one possible to infect him. He said he had not had sex with anybody after me, and he had only had protected sex before me. So that really means, when you interpret it, that he had been lying to the police, since I was not the one that infected him, and that he is probably infected by HIV before we had sex. The prosecutioner's office, the state attorney of Norway, they had all of these papers in front of them, but they decided to prosecute me anyway. So what we ended up with is that I have to go to court in October, indicted of putting somebody at risk of infection, which in fact was already HIV positive before the sex we had. And then again, oral sex with no semen involved, which is the case here, and we both explain the same thing to the police actually. We agree on this, the complainant and me. Is what we call safer sex in Norway. That's what the health sector is actually recommending people with HIV to do, not to infect people. I chose back in November 2011 to go public with the whole thing. I was angry, I was frustrated, I felt like I was treated really unfair. So I did, and I've been public about this for 7.5 months now in Norway, fighting back at the criminalization. Not only that, but the stigma, because I think both of them are connected in a way. And yeah, I'm still doing it, really, but I have to go to court. The strange thing in all of this is that the complainant and I, we have become friends again, because the whole thing about reporting me back then was about affection, really. And already October 2011, he went to the police and wanted to withdraw the whole case. But you cannot do that in Norway, because the law is a public preventive law, and meaning that when somebody pushed a button and report you to the police, accuse you of something with HIV thing, the state takes over. So this is the state versus me, not him. He will only be a witness for the prosecutioner office in court. And we had a re-interview. The police did a re-interview with him recently, actually, and now he tried to withdraw the case for the second time, but he can still not do it. We can use it in court, but the court will definitely happen 5th of October. And yeah, I find it quite interesting to see how that goes, really. It has been, people always ask me if I don't have any feelings about this. I just go on with my life, you know, like nothing happened. That's not true. At the time I was reported, and you know, the weeks after that, I was on the edge of killing myself, actually. I was so depressed. I got help, professional help. I'm still seeing a psychologist, going to therapy. So I cannot say that it's easy. It's just that I was raised as a very stubborn man. So when I start fighting, I don't give up so easily. But I hate it when people look at me and think that I'm like a rock, never give in, you know, the whole thing. It's not like that. I do cry a lot at home at night, actually. It infects me, my family, my work, my entire social network a lot. It does. But of course, on the other hand, I met a lot of fantastic people. Being an activist, I would never change that for anything in the world, really. It's almost like having a new family around me. So it's good and bad. But I might go to jail. Bottom line, I might go to jail. Because I have actually broken the law as the law is written. It's just that in Norway, they usually wouldn't prosecute anyone in a situation like this. Why they did it, nobody knows, really. And the prosecution office, they answered me and my lawyer just a month back, saying that they found it completely irrelevant that the complainant probably actually is HIV positive himself before this happened, meaning really that I'm in a position now that I can charge him for the same felony as I am prosecuted for. So then we end up with 2 cases, 2 court trials, and probably 2 people in jail, and they think that's great. Well.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Louis, for really, really amazing, really highlighting the Kafkaesque experience of living with HIV in Norway, which unfortunately is replicated in many other countries around the world. And really, it seems to me that a lot of this is driven by the stigma of HIV. And I think that's something that our next speaker, Robert Suttle, from Louisiana in the United States, who's the Associate Director of the CIRA project, which I'm sure Robert will tell you about. And he's also had very, very personal experience and lessons to be learned. Robert, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Suttle. I am originally from the state of Louisiana. My case started back in 2008. I was diagnosed with HIV 5 years prior to that, and just struggled with trying to have a normal life over those years. And to fast forward from the time I was diagnosed to my prosecution experience, my situation arises out of a relationship that ended where I was involved with another male partner, and we had unprotected sex. And once we broke up, the partner decided to press charges against me for failing to disclose my HIV status to him. And that was very devastating to me to have that happening to me, because it's just something that I've just never had to face in terms of being in trouble or being in trouble with the law around anything that I have ever done in my life. When I was diagnosed with HIV, I never knew about prosecuting anyone, never thought about doing it. And when this was happening to me, I just didn't know how to process it. At that time, I was working in the court system, believe it or not. However, I never imagined I would find myself on the other side of the law, behind anything, and especially behind being HIV positive. So, when that happened, I just felt like my world had stopped, because here I am facing accusations and really not knowing what will happen and how it would happen. But I remember speaking to him and telling him that if he decided to go forward with, pressing charges against me, which of course he did, that, there was nothing else that he could do, or there's anything that I can do that would stop it. Because as Louis says, once the accusation has been made and it's turned over into the state's hand, they take it and run with it. And so, saying that, I really had no more words for him, because I felt like he had made his decision to do whatever it is that he was going to do. However, he did, threaten to either do that, or, he couldn't take me to civil court because he felt like I didn't have anything monetary-wise to give, towards, I guess, any hurt or harm he felt I had done to him. So criminalization was the answer for him. And so after facing that, and I was arrested at work, believe it or not. I was taken to the police station, and I went through that process of being booked, and so you just get ready to go to court. Now, keep in mind, I work at the court, so these are people that the court that I was being tried in, are people that I would communicate with on a regular, that I would call and speak to. And there's also law enforcement, that works as security for the court. So this community of people that I'm working in are now people that I'm feeling exposed to behind my HIV status as well as my sexuality, because these were two things that I kept private, because I feel like they are private issues, which was my sexuality and my HIV status. So once I was arrested and put in jail, everything that was private to me was finally revealed to my community, and including my family. So I had to make a decision, just like I made a decision to live when I found out about my HIV status. I made a decision to hold my head up high and just to keep going and to do what I can to get through this experience. I decided to take a plea bargain because I couldn't see myself going to prison for at least 10 years, and really not knowing what the outcome of this situation would lead to. And so, to me, taking a plea bargain felt like it was the right thing to do, but unfortunately it was the wrong thing to do. And I would encourage you that if you know anyone, or if you ever find yourself facing any type of sexual crime, that you fight that crime, because it's the prosecution's job to prove that you did whatever it is that they say that you did. And so by that, I ended up getting a 2-year suspended sentence, which means probation. And shortly after that initial sentence and conviction, I was told that I had to register as a sex offender. These were things that were never disclosed to me during the whole time that I had to go to court. Not by my attorney, not by the prosecutor, or not by the judge. But it wasn't until I went to the probation office that I was told I had to register as a sex offender. And so I had to do it, otherwise my probation would be revoked and I would automatically be sent to prison for violating my probation. And so while that's going on, I did have an attorney to represent me. I took all the savings that I had to pay for my own counsel. I took responsibility for that because I found myself in this situation and I didn't want my family to feel responsible for something that I have engaged in that, it was my responsibility. And so I took all that on my own and just handled it as best as I could. And so once I went to the probation office and went through that, I still had to go to court because they had to try to determine whether or not I really had to register as a sex offender. And once they finally decided that I did, it was like, oh, by the way, you'll have to do time in prison because it is considered a sex crime, and any time you are have to register as a sex offender, it does require prison time. And so I'm on probation for nearly a year and a half, so I'm halfway through this 2-year sentence, and then they tell me I have to go to prison, and I was ordered to go to prison for 6 months in a Louisiana prison. And so it's like the question is, how do you prepare to go to prison when you've been out on probation? And so that was really hard to process, but I knew it's something that had to be done. And I knew that once I did that, that would at least provide some type of finality to my experience. And so having said all that, I eventually went to prison and did the 180 days, which is 6 months. But all that time, I had a lot of time to think about, being HIV positive, being charged and convicted for my HIV status. I just felt like that just was wrong. And I knew that if it happened to me, someone who felt like they were a law-abiding citizen, someone that feels like or knew that they were a responsible human being, that it could happen to anybody just as easily. And so I have to say that my case was handled as a general as any criminal case is handled. However, the problem was the HIV part. That's the part that my attorney nor the courts are knowledgeable about. And so I quickly learned that there's a disconnect, or there's just a lack of information there in regards to the complexity of sexual relationships and the relationships between gay men, and how the law is definitely absent or disconnected from those type of relationships within the community. And so since then, I've decided to devote myself to advocacy around this issue, because since they want to label us as sex offenders, convicted felons, and of course me being black and me being gay, there's lots of stereotypes and stigmas, and that comes with that, homophobia, racism. So I have devoted my life to this issue to help bring awareness about HIV/AIDS, as well as the criminalization part. And that's why I'm here today, that's how I'm able here today to share my story with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Robert speaks very much about how he moved from a place of disempowerment to empowerment through connecting with advocates who are working to end unjust prosecutions, which of course is one of the themes of this panel. So before we open to questions, there's one more person to talk to, and or to hear their story. I think one of the things that's very interesting is that those of us in the anti-criminalization movement, where there is sometimes a tendency to demonize the complainant. The reality is that particularly in North America, most of the complainants actually are not living with HIV, because the laws in the US and Canada are about non-disclosure, not actually about alleging transmission. But in other countries around the world, more often than not, the complaints are begun when someone is newly diagnosed and is not able to process the role that they may have played in their acquiring HIV, and often needs to find a way through the criminal justice system because there's no other support. Now, this isn't necessarily the story that we're going to hear, but this is often the story that's characterized as complainants. But I'm very, very happy because we waited a long time to have Marama on the panel, but I'm very happy to have Marama Pala, who's the Executive Director of INA, the Indigenous and Maori Foundation from New Zealand, to talk about her experience on the other side of the courtroom. Marama.
Thank you, Edwin. Can everyone hear me?
No.
No. So I might hold it. Is that all right? Two things at once, multitasking. Kia ora koutou katoa. Greetings from myself and from my homeland. Yes, my name's Marama Pala, and I am an Indigenous person of New Zealand. And my story starts in New Zealand, of course. In 1993, I was a young woman of 22 years old, and as young women do, I was living the life, enjoying myself, and I too was working in the Justice Department of our country. And in October of that year, my cousin, a relative of mine, turned up at my house on a Sunday with a newspaper, and the heading of the newspaper with large print was "Face of Fear." And below that heading was a photograph of a man that I had met in July 1993. Now, I instinctively knew there was something wrong, and I read the article, and the article said, this man has been going around New Zealand infecting women with HIV. If you have had contact with this man, ring this phone number. Now, I had unprotected sex with this man. So I rang that phone number. I was panicking. I was absolutely distraught. I rang the phone number, and there was a policeman, a detective on the end of the phone. And he said to me, if you test positive, will you charge this man and help us stop him from infecting other women around the country? I said yes. Now, in my community, a little bit of history around it is that everyone that knew me knew that I'd had sex with this man because he was from Africa. And I come from a small town who talk, and they all knew that a man from Africa had come here and that little old me had gone off with him. So I had no confidentiality. I had no sort of able to keep it quiet. I was terrified of people knowing. I was terrified of the judgment. I was also terrified that I would have no control over what was happening to me, and I didn't. I really didn't have any control. 2 weeks later, it takes 2 weeks back in those days, and the Western blot test came back positive. Now, at that time, the policeman said again, I had quite a lot of contact with the police around then, and they were really working hard at trying to arrest this man and stop him from infecting women. What I didn't know is that for 2 years, there were women in New Zealand that were trying to stop him. For 2 years, right to the point where they were actually putting up things and hanging up posters and in the community that he was mixing in. I didn't know this. I had no idea that other people in New Zealand knew that he was HIV positive. The court trial went on for about a year, and there was ups and downs, and initially he was charged with the 1969 Legislation Act for willful intent of giving someone a disease. So of course it was a test case in New Zealand. They didn't have any legislations or laws around HIV. They didn't have anything about transmitting illnesses other than this generic law that they used. So they charged him with willful intent. Maximum sentence was 14 years. There was a lot of pressure came down on me as a 22-year-old. I also had to deal with the fact that I was HIV positive. about halfway through that year, I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. I've got slides here to remind myself what I'm talking about. The trial, I didn't want to do it. I had enough. The press were hounding me. It was actually on our national television once a week, updates of the court case. There was magazine articles, there was all sorts of media, and it was just terrifying. I'd walk out my house and there'd be someone sitting there with a camera. And I found that, and I needed support. I needed people to come and support me, and all my family, all the people that were around me just disappeared because they didn't want to be caught up in what was happening to me at that time. They decided that there wasn't enough evidence to actually prosecute him with willful intent, and the judge changed the charge to grievous bodily harm. Now, 5 other women came forward that weren't infected with HIV, who charged him with reckless endangerment. I met some of these women, and for me, being the one that got the virus, I was kind of like, why would you put yourself through this when you didn't get it? It's just, to me, it was the worst experience I've ever had, and here they were willingly doing this. And culturally, from where I come from, I never had a chance to actually talk to, his name was Peter. I never had a chance to talk to him about what had happened. I had never had a chance to, find out why did he do it. I didn't get that chance. So the impact on me, I had pressure from the police, the media, my country, and I also had the pressure from my family. It was like, if I want my family to accept me again, they have to see that I'm not a bad person and that I'm doing something that everyone wants me to do. Now, I didn't expect to be demonised myself. The support that came out for him, in particular the African community, the HIV services that were in New Zealand at the time, they actually completely put the blame on me, which, that's what you do. That's what court cases do. So I found that really hard, dealing with being criminalised, but I'm the person who criminalised HIV in New Zealand. However, I still didn't know what was going on. You've got to remember, at the time, I was very young and didn't understand what was happening. So there were many sort of headlines that went in the paper that, like I said to you before, the media were really there, and there were things about me that I hadn't even said, like I was suicidal, that I had low self-esteem, that I should have known better. He was from a HIV prevalent country, that I should have insisted on wearing a condom. All these judgments were being made about me, and I had no control over it whatsoever. So, you can imagine, I just wanted to crawl off into the bush and die. However, the police were very manipulative, I find. Looking back in retrospective, they were manipulative. When I was about to pull the plug and not do this, the reason that I could charge him is that 1 month before he infected me, he was officially informed that he had HIV from our infectious disease control. And the doctor that did this, he also gave evidence in the trial saying things like he would cut off his left arm to reduce the risk of getting HIV. So it was very sensationalised, and a lot of his comments were being bandied around in the media as well. So here I was, the powers that be in my country, the general public, were seeing him as the villain that needed to be punished. I needed support, and I realise now that he needed support. Criminalisation has many faces. It's multifaceted. It affects you short term and it affects you long term. He was convicted and imprisoned on grievous bodily harm to me, as well as reckless endangerment to me and the 5 other women. He served 7 years, and then when on his release he was deported to Africa and was subsequently died of TB not long after. Now, through that entire time, the thing that motivated me in the end to go through with the trial was I was told a story of one of the young women he had infected, and that was what gave me the motivation to continue. And I thinking about that now, when I was ready to pull out, that was the only thing that kept me going, and it was a 16-year-old girl that he had raped. So I've talked about having no confidentiality, and in our country it was a wake-up call. Before he came to our country, it's still predominantly an MSM spread virus, but he made it real to women and heterosexuals. Anecdotally, I was told by the police that there were at least 20 women he'd infected. I've met 8 personally over the years. If I had a time machine and I could go back and do this again, I think I would have done it differently. With the knowledge that I have now, I probably would have asked for some kind of restorative justice, to be able to sit down with him, let him have support. I've got to wonder what was going on for him on a mental health level. You know, he was told what he had an interpreter there, so he definitely knew the language, and it was being explained to him in a way that he would understand. I want to know what made him want to go out and do these things. He said some things to me in the hotel room that I reflected on later, which could have been a reason, and they were cultural things. But I still wonder, you know, what was it that it happened? And I think he could have been, if he'd had the right support and psychological services or interventions, he could have been stopped. Well, at least seen the error of his ways. Today, the medical professionals and the powers that be that I talked about before, they still see him as pathological. He's still seen as the demon. He still gets referred to. You'd be surprised the places I am where he comes up. I'm here today because I look at my friends up here, and I look at these men, and I think, this shouldn't be happening. You know, this shouldn't be happening, and this is what motivates me. It's not only for the MSM community, but also with women. I know of first-hand experiences where women are living in bad situations and really abusive relationships where the man is threatening to take them to court if they leave. So I can totally understand why we need to stop this now. We need to get really loud about it. And in our country, I speak up about it, of course, and people sort of, you know, I may be the small percentage of someone that may have been willfully infecting people, but still I can see that he had problems. He needed help. I needed help. We both needed help. There was none. Today we have a document that our public health board are working on, that we are allowed to, we're consulted on, and we have input around reducing or managing people who put people at risk of HIV. That stops it right at the first sign by giving them the mental health support they need, by giving them the peer support by other people living with HIV. A lot of the times, you know, we get our diagnosis and it just flies over the top of our head. Who tells us what's going on? Who gives us the education about it? Who even tells us how you can pass it on? How can you infect other people? No one told me. I had to go and research it myself. So, you know, there's those initial places of early diagnosis that we need to be able to get there and give that support, show them that there's peer organisations, but also giving them the information. What was going through his mind? What was Peter thinking when he did what he did? Was he angry? Was he sad? Was he depressed? There's a human voice on this that cannot be answered to by the Justice Department. Now, I left my job. I was working for the district court as a registrar. I couldn't go back there because he was arraigned in the court that I worked at. My previous partners had to give evidence that they didn't have HIV. You know, my life has been forever changed. I'm still known as that girl or that HIV victim that got it from this guy, you know. So it's time that we start talking about it. So thank you for listening to me, and I think I've gone past my time.
what can I say, Marama? It was well worth the wait. An incredibly powerful testimony about how the criminal justice system really doesn't provide justice for so-called victims in these cases, or certainly in Marama's case, and I don't believe that Marama is alone. So I'm so honoured to have these incredibly courageous and powerful advocates against criminalisation on the panel. But I'd like to now open the floor up to comments or questions or any other experiences that you may have had yourselves. And I can see, whilst we're waiting for the first question, I'd like to actually ask Louis a question, because you didn't talk so much about the impact that you've actually made in those 7.5 months since you went public, and we had extremely good news yesterday that 2 leading politicians in the Norwegian coalition government have come out very strongly against the use of the criminal law in Norway. And I think that your advocacy may have played some part in that. Could you explain how you have how coming out and being so public and actually having already some visible success, how that impacts how you're feeling about what may happen to you in the future?
Well, let me start to explain. When I started to think about going public, it was actually months before I did. I have 3 very good friends of mine, which is all 3 journalists, professional journalists. So I asked them, how could I do this? Should I do it? They all said, no, don't do it, Louis, because you don't know media. Media and HIV is not a good combination. But I did it anyway, and I told them that I would do it anyway, and then they changed a little bit, and they started to give me good advices about how to do it if I absolutely had to, which I had to. And there were simple things like, if you want to go out there in the national media, make sure that you write the articles and get them published. If you do interviews, make sure that you can read the interviews, check them before they go public. And if some journalists say no, don't do it. Don't ever answer journalists calling you. There's a deadline tomorrow, can you give a comment on this? Never do it. So, I use these techniques, and especially on television and radio, do live shows when it's direct, because then you are in control of what's going to be said. They cannot edit you in the same way. So I tried to be faithful to these advices, and I think that's part of the reason that it's actually went quite well in Norway with me. I mean, there's a lot of people that have been fighting criminalization in Norway for quite a few years, actually. So I'm not the only one. The only thing that makes me differ from the others is that I'm the first one that actually are prosecuted, going public and talking about it, which is wow, this is not supposed to happen. When you are prosecuted, when you are charged, you should be full of shame, you should be quiet, you should hide. And I did the opposite thing, which I think made quite some impact. And then again, of course, I have probably the best case in Norwegian history to go public with. How to measure success when you fight in media? It's not easy, really. I think the biggest moment in those 7.5 months was actually when, a few months back, the leader of the healthcare committee went on the speaker's chair in Parliament, and he used me, my case, and my name as an example of how bad things are turning out in Norway when it comes to HIV and criminalization. It didn't really have that impact in Norwegian media, but to me it was wow, finally, for the first time, and I've been trying to talk to politicians all those 7.5 months, but it's not a really good case for the politicians, this one. So when he said this in Parliament, I knew that now something is going to happen, because politicians are starting to talk about me now, starting to talk about it. And then unfortunately, while we are here, but still, less than 48 hours ago, two politicians, the leader there from a few months back and another one from the Labour Party, they went out in the newspapers and they really got a lot of coverage on this one the last 24 hours back in Norway, talking about removing the penal code, doing something about criminalization in Norway. Made a huge impact, actually. So that's success, I guess. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but still.
Thanks. Is a question? Yes.
Hi. Actually, just a brief comment. And first of all, thank you so much for your presentations, your testimony, but most of all for your lives, the way that you're fighting for all of us by fighting for yourselves. My name is Walt Centerford. I'm an epidemiologist and an activist for the last 25 years. And one of the things that you said that resonated with me is the profound impact of the sudden devastation of your privacy, even if partly you were already, out and known in parts of your lives. And the same thing happened to me about 12 years ago. I was working for the U.S. Centers for Disease Control as a visiting scientist working on prevention with positives on loan from LA. And I was only one of only four HIV positive people that were known to be HIV positive out of 700 people working there, and the only one who was also an activist. Somebody else who was upset at the government, actually he was a former HIV activist himself, found a clip from me on an HIV positive website, personal ad site, that said, I was who I was and that I was looking for potential partners. It didn't mention I was HIV positive because it was a damn HIV positive. Everybody on this website was HIV positive. But he took that and circulated it to everybody in charge at the CDC and to congressional members of U.S. Congress in charge of the appropriations for CDC and said, look, they have an HIV positive person there who's not saying that he's HIV positive and he's out there looking for sex partners in the gay community and putting people at risk. This led to, it wasn't the only reason. I kind of got forced out of that job and sent back to LA. I was generally a little too outspoken for their tests. As somebody once told me, look, Walt, you don't understand, you're an official of the Bush administration when you work for the CDC. I guess I didn't get that part. But it was the, but that violation of my privacy in that way, that was a deliberate distortion, but also the fact that it could put me at such vulnerability and risk, and it did.
Thank you. That was, really, it's another egregious example of how those of us living with HIV are made more vulnerable because of not just punitive laws and policies, but just because of stigma. If there's no more, I'd like to actually ask Robert about, what's interesting about your life, Robert, is that your case actually wasn't publicized, but you have subsequently become very visible. And I'm wondering how that's impacted your life.
I would say that it has given me, this advocacy has given me new meaning of life. The time that I was in prison, I felt like it was over. My life was over. My career potential or opportunities were over. I've gone to college and worked really hard to get to a position or a place in life to where I could be able to support myself. And it was all over. It was simply because I had gay sex and I'm HIV positive. And I felt upset with myself that how did I allow myself to get to this level? I should know better, or how did it get to this? But on the flip side of it, I knew that a lot hadn't been invested in me, growing up, and people looked to me to do something right, to do something with myself, and I knew I had to do something, but I just didn't know what that was. And As I've said before, this issue brought me much misery, and that I remember being told that, your misery is your ministry. And I think at that point was when I decided that I wanted to get involved in advocacy, and that this would be my ministry, and hope that I could use it to help other people, which in turn will help me in the long run, because it gives me something to do. It gives me a purpose to go on after being convicted of a crime, because in this country, in the U.S., if any of you know, Americans that you know, it's really hard to move on with life being a convicted felon. No one will hire you, and being a sex offender, where will you stay? Who will hire you? Who wants to have a sex offender working for them? And I just don't understand how is it that we have these laws and these penalties, but yet we do nothing. Once people have completed their time, they've done what the law has asked them to do, that we're not restored back to some level to where we can support ourselves. And this advocacy has really, as I said, has really given me new meaning and new purpose in life. And I hope to use every day of my life to be able to help bring about change to this issue, and with people living with HIV.
Thank you, Robert. Now, this panel actually was inspired by Sean Stroob, who is the director of the Zero Project and also the founder of Pars Magazine. And I'm sure he would be here right now if he weren't so exhausted after having spent the last few days really rallying policymakers and politicians and getting all kinds of amazing information around the injustice of HIV criminalization into this conference. But I'd actually go back to Robert because I think it's useful for everyone here to know about the Zero Project and what it does, because these three people here are not the only people who are telling their stories of the impact of criminalization. In fact, that's part of what the Zero Project does. If you could tell us some more.
Yes, the Zero Project is a new organization that works combating against HIV criminalization specifically, as well as stigma and discrimination. We actually reach out to other people that have actually been, whose lives have been threatened, or who have also experienced prosecution. We have different stories, but they're all relative, but we come from different backgrounds. So it's not just one or certain type of people, it's just people like you and me, just ordinary people that are, that are positive, that are trying to go on and have normal, healthy lives. And by that, when you're going through this experience, you feel like you're the only one. You feel like no one else knows what it is that you're going through. And so through the Zero Project, we've been able to reach out to other people who have actually faced prosecutions. And just by doing that, it gives people a sense of community, that while I'm not the only one. And so with that, we do our best to reach out and to stay connected to them, to let them know what's going on, to let them know that we're here to support them, and to also provide some sort of guidance as to how to deal with this issue. And we actually have those stories documented on our website, which is Zero, SERO, project.com. And you can feel free to check that out. That's zeroproject.com, SERO project.com. And you can see the many stories that we have, and we're hoping to do more. And if you know of anyone that's facing this or have been threatened with this, to please, direct them to us. We'd be glad to link with them and to be supportive for them.
Thanks, Robert. So I think we have another question or comment.
Yeah, other than filling out these cards so we can encourage President Obama to support Barbara Lee's bill, what can people do to help? What are the advocacy things, like the top three, that we need to do so we can get these laws changed? What do you think?
I would say first, find out who the major players are, and what I mean is the organizations that are getting involved. One, the Zero Project, for those international, the HIV Justice Network, and for those that, in Canada, I'm not sure what else is going on in other places right off the top of my head, but those are organizations that you want to connect with that are actually addressing HIV criminalization, to actually talk about it. Not many AIDS service organizations are really dealing with this issue because there's not a really, I hate to say it, but there's no funding tied around HIV criminalization as it is with prevention. And so I would strongly encourage you to, if you're interested in this issue, which I hope you are, that you will just connect with those organizations that are talking about it. So that's one. Then two, educate yourself on the issue. This is very complicated and a complex issue to discuss, and it's not just one side. You know, there's many sides to this. And we as advocates, we understand that, but we also realize that criminalizing people based on their status, whether it's disclosure, non-disclosure, or exposure, or transmission, this is not the answer. It's a public health issue that does not need to be handled in a criminal law.
Comment to that question, actually. I totally agree with Robert here, but when I reach out to a lot of those organizations which really, will sympathize with the cause, and there's a lot of those organizations in Norway, actually, I find that one of the biggest challenges with those organizations is that they can agree as much as they want, but they're just talking to themselves and each other, and it's not going to happen anything when they do that. So I'm always encouraging them to go more public, dare to talk about this. You're powerful organizations, Don't just write it in your small member letters and talk to each other on meetings where everybody agrees. It's like talking to the congregation. It doesn't help, really. Talk to the media, make discussions, get it out there. I mean, all of them together are quite powerful, to influence politics. So this is what I'm struggling with back in Norway, really.
I mean, I'd like to say, I think for a long time, a lot of us have been worried that we weren't ready for prime time in terms of our arguments. But I think that this conference really has, we're at the point now where it's very clear we now actually have the evidence for the first time from the US and from Canada and from elsewhere in the world that if you take the test, you risk arrest. It actually is having an impact on willingness to know one's status. And given that this conference is about ending AIDS and all the biomedical technologies that everyone's lauding, traumatic prevention and PrEP, all of those things require getting a test. You have to get a test, an HIV test, before you can access treatment or prevention. And so HIV criminalization, certainly from the arguments from a public health point of view, are very strong. But this panel, and certainly this networking zone, is about human rights, and I think the arguments are just as strong, if not stronger, that singling out people living with HIV as being legally and criminally liable for prevention, which is a shared responsibility when sex is consensual, is absolutely unjust. So I think we have the arguments now, and I think that we can go public and really make a big difference. I think, Marima.
Just a strategy that we're incorporating in New Zealand and Australia is two-pronged, actually. It's one where, never underestimate the power of a person living with HIV speaking up, for a start. Find your champions, train them up, skill them with media, skill them with public speaking. Secondly, target organisations that are discriminatory. This is one of the things that we do as an organisation. And why I say people living with HIV who are knowledgeable and able to go into those places that discriminate, you'll be surprised by the reaction you get. So that is our strategy in my country.
So we've got 1 or 2 minutes and a final comment or question before we close this panel.
My name is Alberto Colorado. I'm a patient advocate for tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS patients. And one of the things that I'm so happy to finally to pass around this booth, because right now I'm trying to change guidelines anti-immigrants living with HIV and being tested by tuberculosis also from those countries who wanted to apply to work in the Gulf Arab countries. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's a lot of problems right now, people suffering because they cannot go and work in the Arab countries, in 5 or 6 Arab countries from the Gulf. And I haven't been finding a good organization to support this fight. That people are sending me stories, horrible stories, how they are being separated from their families and how they are not allowed to go to work on those countries. So I'm happy to be here and to listen to you. So I'm going to have your contact information to continue with that, because TB and HIV goes together.
Thank you, and thank you for reminding us that in fact the HIV criminalization, the anti-HIV criminalization movement is actually part of a broader social justice movement around issues of legal discrimination of people living with HIV all over the world, and it's certainly important that we all join together and highlight the injustices and the irrationality of these policies. So I'd really like to thank the three amazing panelists, and I hopefully we can all give them a final round of applause for such incredible testimony. Thank you. And thank you all for being here.